Welcome to AP Euro for Winners.
Today, we are concluding Unit 2 with talking about 16th century society and politics and art, particularly with Mannerism and Baroque art.
The first thing we need to discuss, as always, is a little bit of context to understand how society is in the 1500s. So, we have hierarchies of classes and religions and genders that we've been thinking about, we've been learning about, and they're going to continue to define social status and the perceptions of people in rural and in urban settings. Some of these hierarchies are the idea that it is very important to own land, right? Those who own land are of a higher social status. Nobles and aristocrats have privileges with regard to taxing and be able to charge fees, and they have certain legal protections, right? So nobles are a class above. Women are politically excluded. We have learned about a few women who were powerful, like Elizabeth I and Catherine de' Medici and Isabel of Castile from Spain. However, those are the exception to the rule, and they had some special circumstances that made them powerful. For the most part, women are not involved in politics. And then the last idea here is that rural and urban households are going to work together as units when they're doing their work. So often men and women would work in separate but complementary tasks. So for example, let's say you're a common family and you're a blacksmith family. The man might be doing the blacksmith work, the metalworking, while the woman might be doing the bookworking, the financial work that goes along with the business. So that's kind of how these two groups, genders would work together.
Let's take a second and focus on women. Like we just said in the previous slide, women were viewed as caretakers, they were the bearer of children, they were supposed to be submissive to their husbands, and they're responsible for educating the kids. Just it's a point worth noting here that noble women had more children than poor women because they had wet nurses, which is when you pay someone to breastfeed your kids for you. And they wanted to carry on their family line, so they tried to have more kids to ensure that a couple of them survived. So just important note there. But then we see things like the Renaissance and the Reformation. They're going to raise debates about female education and women's roles in the family and church and society. And the question becomes, are women more than just childbearers? We have this famous book called La Querelle des Femmes, which is AKA The Woman Question. It's an intellectual debate that about spans like 300 years between the 1400s and the 1700s on the nature of women. Are women capable of being educated? Are they even smart? Should they be allowed to become preachers? Generally, these discussions ended with answering no to these, but the talking and the debating did give women a little bit more of a platform. They gained a little bit more access to education and freedoms, but we're going to see later on in this lesson that's definitely going to backfire.
We want to talk a little bit about society and morality now. And so it's important to note we've been thinking about the Catholic Church and the Protestant Reformation, right? And so the Catholic Church is so focused on stopping anti Catholic sentiment, fixing their issues with the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Reformation, that cities are the ones that have to regulate morality, which are moral and ethical standards, right? The cities are the ones that have to do it on their own. The church is not going to be able to do enough to help them. So, how are they going to do that?
Well, they're going to focus on morality above all else. So society is going to tend to focus on being moral and acting pious every day of the year. But they're also going to make new secular laws regarding private life, like communal leisure activities. So we have things like the Saints' Day festivities.
So, these are different towns would have festivals in honor of like a saint that would be for the town. So, like East Haddam would have a festival one day a year, right? Like, think of this kind of like our town fairs, but each town and village would have a different festival on a different day. And so what families would do is you would, obviously go to the one in your town, but it was also important to go to the ones in nearby towns so that you could get to know other people. Let's say you're that blacksmith family and you have a daughter and you're trying to arrange a marriage for your daughter. Well, maybe when you go to another town's festival, like you go to East Hampton's festival, right? And you find another blacksmith family and you arrange a marriage for your daughter with another blacksmith family because your daughter would be a great blacksmith's wife because she knows the business a little bit. And so these festivals were something people looked forward to, but it was also a way to connect with other people and increase, how much reach you had within your business and within your family.
Kind of like government sponsored town fairs. It's kind of how we see them. So we also see carnivals. We see the rise of blood sports, which is like bullfighting and fox tossing, which is literally exactly what it says, tossing a fox up in the air. And then common people tended to stick with more team sports because it's a little bit cheaper and have more access to it, whereas people with money are tending to do more elite, money based individual sports like fencing, horseback riding, and falconry. So, and then on top of all that, the societies are going to publish more stricter codes on prostitution and begging and just try to clean things up.
Continue with our talk about morality and how cities are going to regulate this. Cities are going to use humiliation as punishment to enforce this idea of public morality. For example, sinners might be publicly whipped or branded, which is when they would like take a hot iron and put it on your skin so that everybody knew what you did. Maybe they would put you into the stocks, like you see in the bottom left picture. They might have a parade where they mock you, right? You're forced to walk through the streets and everyone mocks you. So these are different ways that they're using humiliation to punish you. And a lot of the time, citizens would be encouraged to tip off the government about people that were being immoral so that they could, have one of these punishments. Another idea here is that comboed with morality, but also with the new debate on women's role in society, we're going to see a big increase in accusations of witchcraft, mostly focused on women. So, for example, we got 5 signs of being a witch. Now, you don't need to know these signs, but we just thought it was interesting. If you owned a cat, if you have a large mole or a birthmark, if you attempted to predict the identity of your future husband, if you had moldy butter or bread, or if you floated in water. Okay, so these are some different signs, but the idea here is that women, maybe are starting to question their place in society, and then a lot of times society, men, even other women, are going to lash back to that with accusations that of witchcraft, right? So we're going to see social upheaval and these witch accusations peak in the late 1500s, early 1600s. And again, this is kind of in response to women, some women trying to question their place in society.
Because a lot of these people aren't going to want to see these changes, right? They want to get back to comfort and morality. So we're going to see all this manifest itself in 2 new forms of art. We're going to focus on the Mannerist and Baroque art forms, and they're going to be created in reaction to all these societal changes. And let's think back a little bit. In order for these art movements to be encouraged and to kind of be a thing, we have to have patronage, which is people willing to pay other artists for their works.
Now we're going to break down Mannerist art, and later we'll break down Baroque art, but it's important that you're able to differentiate between these two. And as we go through all of AP Euro, we're going to learn about a lot of different forms of art. So we're going to have to make sure we can keep these separate in our heads. So let's talk Mannerist art. Mannerist art is 1500s, 1520s to 1600. Its origins are from Rome and Italy, and then it's going to expand throughout Europe and actually gets very popular in Spain. This is created in reaction to the Renaissance. So we have Renaissance art, and then next is Mannerist art. And Mannerist art, again, is a reaction to Renaissance art. And Mannerist art is going to be reacting to Renaissance art in the idea that life is not always perfect and symmetrical, like we saw in Renaissance art. So what is the focus? What's the style of Mannerist art? There's a lot of distortion, elongation, twisting forms, a theatrical style. It's not always going to focus on religious topics, but sometimes it is. And again, this is going back to the idea that life isn't always perfect. That's why we see this elongation in some of these pictures. Michelangelo, in his later work, is seen as a Mannerist artist. His paintings, like the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel, where you can see here, turns a little bit darker. So this is a depiction of the second coming of Christ and his final and eternal judgment by God of all humanity. And on the right here, you can kind of see this creepy part of this, which is focusing in the middle of the Sistine Chapel, but on the right, you can kind of see it. This is a skin suit. You see that little guy hanging from that guy's arm? That's a skin suit. That's Michelangelo doing a self-portrait of himself, but depicting himself as Saint Bartholomew, who's one of the 12 apostles of Jesus, after he had been flayed, which is being skinned alive. Kind of creepy. But this is a reflection of the feelings of contempt that Michelangelo has for being commissioned to paint the Last Judgment. So again, we see after the Renaissance, we see even some Renaissance artists move into more Mannerist art style where, again, life isn't always perfect. We're twisting our forms. There's more elongation. There's some more dark to this stuff.
All right, so let's focus in on a little bit of a case study here as we see an example comparison between Renaissance style painting and Mannerist, focusing on The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci and Tintoretto. Leonardo da Vinci doing the top one, Tintoretto doing the bottom painting. And the paintings represent two interpretations of the scene of the Last Supper of Jesus with the 12 apostles. And as it's told in the Gospel of John, right? Specifically, the moment after Jesus announces that one of his apostles is about to betray him. So let's look at the differences. And on the top, we see more self-portraits, less bright lighting on the bottom, and then not as much symmetry in the bottom as well. So my eye kind of goes right to one point of the top picture, right in the center, whereas the bottom, my eye jumps all over the place, and it's a little bit more chaotic, less symmetry. Just like I was saying, there's no focal point in the bottom picture. The focus is no longer on the center. We got some darkness. My eyes are jumping everywhere. It's a little bit more intense. The darker colors are used in the bottom painting. And it's going to reject this Renaissance style of perfection, right? People are kind of all over the place in the bottom, whereas the top is very symmetrical, it's a pretty painting despite the circumstances of the painting. It's a little bit more of a brighter, lighter tone, whereas the bottom is definitely darker.
Let's go into some more famous Mannerist painters. Two more examples here before we move on. Parmigianino. I don't know. I messed that one up. But early 1500s painter, his painting's on the top right, self-portrait. We can see, focus on the elongation, that distortion. We see his hand kind of coming around. It kind of looks like a fisheye lens a little bit, right? Like his hand is coming around the elongation. So a different way of doing the self-portrait. And on the bottom, we have a painter nicknamed El Greco. He's a Greek artist, and in his art, he liked to show tension and emotion. That was the complexity that was going on during the Counter Reformation in Spain. And this painting is actually called The View of Toledo. We changed the painting. So this is not the Miracle of the Christ of the Bible. It's called The View of Toledo. And in this, this is a landscape painting that he does. And again, we can see that it's dark, that there's not a real clear focal point. And this is him painting the city that he lived in and that he worked in for most of his life. But it's just a different way to do a portrait compared to how the Renaissance might do it. In here, we see a lot darker. Again, no focal point. So those are some good manners things to think about.
And let's see what happens after Mannerist art. So we got an art style called Baroque art, 1600s to about mid-1700s. And this is the Catholic Church's efforts to fight back against the Protestant Reformation, right? It's part of the Catholic Reformation, Counter-Reformation, and is a response to Mannerist art. Its origins are again in Rome and Italy. It comes from the Portuguese term barroco, which means a flawed plural. You don't need to know that. But because Catholics like art, Protestants did not like art because the Bible says that salvation can be found in God's words only, right? So we're going to see, Catholics are going to try to use this art platform to kind of gain more followers, right? Convert more people to Catholicism or strengthen their religious bond.
This should kind of make sense if we're thinking about the differences in the Protestant Reformation video about the difference between Catholic and the Protestant religions as far as like how fancy and ornate their churches were, right? Like the Catholic churches, they talked a lot about like having, fancy art. There's a lot of patronage. There's a lot of glass windows, whereas a lot of the Protestant religions did not believe in having a fancy churches. They had really simple churches. So that's kind of another connection you can make here.
So Baroque art, paintings, music, and architecture, all of that can be Baroque style. It's going to be seen with these features. It's supposed to make you, the viewer, feel this overpowering belief and connection to God, right? We have this Catholic focus. It's realistic. It's not idealized. It's a moment in time, and it's okay if it's dark, right? If that moment in time is dark. It's supposed to be dramatic. It's supposed to have motion and emotion and really kind of get that viewer feeling something, right? This kind of feeling of instability even. These are going to be the style tones of Baroque art.
So let's look at a couple of famous Baroque artists. On the top, we have Caravaggio, and he is the Catholic Church's primary painter in this time period because, again, he makes people feel something with his art. And this is a painting he has called The Calling of Saint Matthew. And on the bottom, we have another Baroque artist, a sculptor named Gian Bernini, and he is a famous sculptor. This is a sculpture of David. Now, I want you to focus in on the bottom one because I think it's an easy one to make comparisons to the Renaissance. And the Renaissance, if you're thinking about the statue of David, which is a little bit more famous and well known, that's a still statue. It's like not supposed to be an action shot. It's of the same. Bernini does a sculpture of the same event, right? David versus Goliath, But in this one, we see the sling, we see him in action, right? We see a lot more movement going on compared to the Renaissance one that we've probably all seen before. So this is a good way to figure out that Baroque art, again, is still trying to have a religious vibe. We're still bringing up religious stories, but we're focusing more on movement. We're focusing more on a moment in time.
Here are College Board's historical developments. Again, as always, please take a read of these. Thank you for watching. Shout out to our AP Euro students. And that's it for Unit 2. So next video, we're going to start Unit 3.
Until then, bye!